We also have Tel Aviv Institute senior fellow and Israeli writer Hen Mazik joining us. Hen, I know you've been studying this. I know that you spent a lot of your time trying to find ways to talk about what's happening in Gaza, which is horrific and has really offended and harmed people across the world. I mean, obviously people physically in Gaza, but emotionally everywhere else. How do you have the conversation in a responsible and productive way?
Yeah, I think what you said earlier was really spot on. We need to be more careful with the way we are expressing ourselves, specifically in regards to this conflict. And, the chants that we've seen, like calling for an intifada, which is a violent uprising where hundreds of Jews were killed in Israel, and saying it online or saying it at Columbia University has direct consequences, which we've seen last night. We've heard people spending 19 months now calling Israelis genocidal, thieving, colonizers with no homeland, no history. And then a lot of us are surprised that someone shoot us in the streets. This was not an attack on Israel. Of course, it was an execution of two people outside of a Jewish museum in the capital of the United States. And not that there's ever an excuse for a killing of this sort, but it matters because they weren't in a base or government building. They were leaving a Jewish event in Washington, D.C. Anti-Semitism escalated so much that we are seeing an incident like this happening in America.
Yeah, and unless he knew these two people, and there's no indication that he did, it's unclear that he would know that they had any connection to the Israeli embassy, only that they were coming out of a Jewish institution. So there are questions of, was he targeting two people connected with Israel, or was he targeting two Jews? And that's a really scary prospect, and that is one that has been, that Jews have said they've been harmed by, this idea that just because they are Jewish, they are responsible for what the government of Israel is doing. At the same time, there are people that feel like they are not allowed to express themselves and express their discomfort or their agony or their disgust at what they're seeing overseas, what they're seeing in Gaza, the way that the Israeli government is conducting the war. They feel it is amoral. How do you express that without fostering dangerous anti-Semitism?
Right, and that's, just a couple of days ago, I posted on my Instagram my call for peace and against the war and criticizing the Israeli government for its actions, because I truly believe in peace and I believe in Palestinians and Israelis' rights, and the fact that this war is ongoing and the hostages are still in Gaza is horrific. But I was able to do it without falling into anti-Semitic rhetoric, without calling for the destruction of Israel. It seems like when it gets to Israel, it's the only country in the world that has a conflict when people find that the only solution to the conflict is the complete eradication of the country and ethnically cleansing all the Jews from there. And I think it's because we have somehow allowed this sort of rhetoric to go on without challenging it enough. I think that anti-Semitism is the only form of hatred today in America where people are not going to get canceled for it. I mean, look at Kanye West. He's still producing albums and music, latest one calling Heil Hitler, and it's allowed. I mean, I think that what non-Jews can do is to stop gaslighting Jews about anti-Semitism. And when we say that something is anti-Semitic, when the majority of the community is saying something is anti-Semitic, just believe us and stand with us. I think that would make a big difference.
A big place where this conversation was happening and this tension occurred was on college campuses. It's still on college campuses. Jeremy, you've done a lot of reporting on that. What is it like on college campuses right now? And I guess just bring us back to the protests in their height. Were they peaceful protests? Were they hateful protests? How do you describe them?
A lot of them were very menacing, I would say. And there's footage of this from schools across the country, from NYU to UCLA. The way that demonstrators, not all of them students, but a lot of them would cover their faces seemed to give them a sense that they could pretty much say whatever they wanted or be as aggressive as they wanted to be, kind of like watching the culture on campus turn into a version of anonymous online comments, right? Because if you don't have to show your identity, you're probably more likely to behave in a way that is not acceptable. I mean,
why did they feel like they had to hide their faces? I mean, we've seen so many
Right.
protests in this country, and hiding your face has not been a characteristic of it. I mean, in fact, they banned hiding your face in a lot of protests because of what happened with the KKK. You weren't
Yeah.
allowed to cover your face because that's what enabled the KKK to terrorize communities, because they had that veil of anonymity. But because of the pandemic, face coverings became much more prevalent and much more accepted.
And look, I'm not trying to say that I think the overheated rhetoric at a lot of these protests is directly responsible for a heinous act like this, but this is an example, what happened in Washington, of the kind of terrorism that you see perpetrated against Israel in the intifadas coming to the United States. I mean, it's going after civilians, targeting them in an attempt to create fear and terror. Unfortunately, it's now come to our doorstep. So I think that there is, when you hear people complaining about the tensions on campus and shouts of globalize the intifada or from the river to the sea, there's a reason people are so sensitive about that, because there is a long, millennia long history here toward persecution of the Jews. And a crucial part of that always has been gaslighting, as your previous guest was just saying. A unique feature of anti-Semitism is the fact that anti-Semites try to convince people it doesn't exist.
Yeah. Paul, you know, one of the, another era where there was a big backlash toward a community was the aftermath of 9/11 and the wars in Afghanistan and Iraq. And there was a lot of hate and a lot of anger toward Arabs, toward Muslims in this country. But there was a lot of pushback against that, a lot of concerted, organized pushback against that, not just from individuals, but from civic leaders, also from politicians high up. I mean, there was that famous moment with John McCain pushing back on that woman at the town hall, calling Barack Obama a Muslim, blah, blah, blah.
Right.
I mean, there was an effort to say that is not okay.
Right.
Do you think that there is that same communal effort to say this sort of stuff, this anti-Semitic anger, these sorts of attacks? Is the pushback the same?
No. And especially not from the White House, which has to set the overall national tone on what is tolerated. And what we've got here is domestic violent extremism is the #1 national security threat in America. The Pentagon has been warning that for years. Now, Jews are uniquely vulnerable. They have been increasingly attacked, and there's a long history there, and the attacks are increasing. But it's not just them. There are other communities that are at risk now, including the Muslim community, including the trans community. And the president has a responsibility to set a responsible tone.
For all of them.
For all of them.
But they've been pretty forceful about
but also
anti-Semitism.
to also have a national security strategy to battle it.
Yeah.
And that's what we don't have right now. We continue to divide, we continue to ratchet up, we continue to marginalize people from the White House because that is what Trump does. And he doesn't offer a national security plan to lower the volume, to make people safer, and to protect them when they don't feel safe, whether they're Jews, Muslims, or trans people. And that's the larger issue. Every week we talk about a new threat. Last week we were talking about threats to politicians. Everyone feels less safe in this country right now because we are less safe and we are less vulnerable. And ultimately, it's the commander-in-chief's job. Sorry, more vulnerable.
Yeah.
Because it's the commander-in-chief's job to address it.
Hen, I'm going to give you the last word on this. How do you want the country to react to what happened last night?
I mean, I think people need to remember that they don't have to support Israel. They don't have to agree with everything Israel is doing. But if we can say that murdering people for being Jewish or Israeli is wrong, you're not anti-war, you're anti-Semitic. And I think that right now what we really need is our non-Jewish friends and people around us to show us support and to tell us that we're not alone, because a lot of us are truly terrified for our safety.
And I'm going to ask this of the police commissioner a moment ago. What about wearing a Jewish symbol when you're out on the street? Do you feel comfortable doing that when you're here in America?
No, I don't. And I often consider putting it into my shirt. I know a lot of Jews would know that this feeling of taking it in and out because you are afraid for your safety. You know, we heard that there was an increase of 900% anti-Semitic incidents in the U.S. in a decade alone. But there's so many times that I've been shoved and attacked and times that I wouldn't even report it. So I know the numbers are much greater. it's terrible. It's terrible feeling to know that you're not safe and that you are constantly being told that the reality that you know exists and the fear that you have is just not valid, and that's the worst feeling.
Hen Mazig, I'm sorry that I mispronounced your name before. Thank you very much for joining us. We do hope you come back. Paul Rieckhoff, Jeremy Peters, thank you as well.